Brand disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed on this platform by individuals, callers, or invited guests are their own. The information you hear does not reflect the overall views of all parties associated with the brand. We encourage everyone to research all things heard live or via archive for edification purposes. Discretion is advised.
Help keep the show on the air. If you want to help, you can send your donation through PayPal. The email is debatetalkforyou@gmail.com or through Cash App, $Sal Showtime. Thanks for your support.
It seems like a lot of our youth are dropping out of school and joining gangs. Why is school not important to a lot of the youth today, in your opinion?
Well, number one, we have to understand that there really is no dropout rate. We have a push-out rate. Our high schoolers are literally being pushed out of school by principals and teachers, most of whom are middle-class white women, who really are not the least bit interested in educating our young people. They are being persuaded against attending school. And this strategy of persuading our young people not to go to school is intensifying in the present day because it helps to serve the gentrification movement that is seeking to remove blacks out of the inner city and replace them with whites. In other words, whenever you have a school with a significant truancy issue on a daily basis, that sets the stage for local and state government to come in and shut the school down under the auspices that there's not enough children attending. This, in turn, allow the gentrifying whites to come into that neighborhood, reopen that school, and build it for their own children. It also allows white developers to come in and buy off the school buildings so they can then turn them into lofts for middle and upper-class white people. All institutions of white supremacy work together. The school works with the prison works with the government works with the criminal justice system. That, in turn, works with the economic system. So whenever you see any type of an issue, we have to always be conscious with our third eye and our political eye in knowing that that particular strategy is actually benefiting white supremacy on several different levels. So the young men are being pushed out as part of the ethnic cleansing of the black community or the ethnic cleansing of the inner cities, removing the blacks out for the whites. It is legal in most states to take children off of your roll. You can remove them from the roll if they have been absent for a certain amount of days, and you do not have to go looking for them. Now, depending on the state, that might be ninth grade or it might be the age of 16, depending on your state. But in nearly everywhere in America, if children are missing from school, there really is no interest to go out and find out why. And as far as our children not being interested in their education, I don't agree with that. I think our young people are very interested in an education. What they don't want is an indoctrination. What they don't want is a homosexualization. Our children are not being taught anything that is really going to serve them over the long haul in their lives. And they're seeing this. They're seeing this. They're seeing that the education that they're getting in school is not preparing them to lead a life of independence. So many of them are leaving the school not because they don't like education, but because they're not interested in being miseducated. On top of that, we have to add that most states now have a mandatory graduation examination, where you have to pass a test in order to get a high school diploma. So if you're looking at a young man who's always academically struggled because he's never received an appropriate education in the first place, now he's being faced with the fact that even if he goes to school, even if he does his work, even if he gets good report card grades, he might still not get a high school diploma because he has to pass a test at the end of his high school career. So they're not leaving because they want to. They're leaving because they don't see any future in public education as it's currently designed.
The number is 646-716-7320. That's 646-716-7320. What about the special ed programs out there? I saw that you mentioned something about special ed. on the YouTube. Tell the people about the special ed programs out there.
Well, special education itself is the general term used to describe the United States federal government's Public Law 94-142, which was created in 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It was no coincidence that special education emerged a decade following the Civil Rights Bill and 2 decades following the Brown versus Board of Education Topeka, Kansas decision. The purpose of special education politically for black children is to legally marginalize, segregate, and miseducate them. Special education allows racist schools and educators to resegregate black children away from white children. Instead of saying they're black, they can now say that they have a learning disability, which, by the way, is a condition that cannot be proven to exist. It is an idea. It is a concept. It is not a fact. It is a professional opinion. And so they use mild mental retardation, another condition that is difficult to prove to exist, and emotional disturbance. And then you add to these the clinical disorders of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which I like to refer to as ain't no damn daddy at home disorder, because that's really what it is, a condition that's growing out of America's mass incarceration war against black men. Simply put, they're removing black men from the homes, and they are putting the children on drugs because the fathers aren't there. And so the psychiatrist has become the new father in the black community by simply writing out a prescription to deal with inappropriate behavior, when that generally was the job of the father. But because the father is being arrested and marginalized and castrated from the black community, they're simply drugging the children into submission. So special education is the number one cause of the large functional illiteracy rate that we have in the black community. When I go to prisons and speak in prisons, and I spend a lot of time in prisons, a lot of the gentlemen and young men there were special educated. In fact, the average reading level of an inmate in a federal penitentiary is 3.5 grade level. So why is it that the average reading level of an inmate is 3.5 years of schooling, 3.5 grade? That's because many of these individuals were special educated. When a child is put in special education, they are no longer expected to achieve as well as their peers. That is serious, because when you allow your child to go to special ed, you're saying that I really don't think there's much hope for him above and beyond the special education program. Now, a lot of children could go into special ed, and they might only be in there for part of the day or maybe a couple hours a week. We're not talking so much about the itinerant level of special education support. We're talking about our full-time special education children, full-time special education children who are separated from the regular ed setting all day, 5 days a week, and deliberately miseducated, when we know full well that by the time they graduate high school, if they graduate at all, they will not be academically functional. So they will not be able to consider trade school. Many of them won't be able to consider college, and many of them won't even be able to get a job, because special education allows the school districts of America, both public and charter, to legally miseducate our children.
That's right. Now, a lot of our youth are growing up in single-parent households. What psychological effects does that have on our youth today?
One of the biggest problems of the single-parent phenomenon in the black community is that it has been happening so long that a lot of people are beginning to believe that it's okay. I was at an Urban League conference this past spring where I was asked to facilitate a discussion in New Orleans at the annual Urban League convention. And an issue came up in my workshop regarding single parenthood. And I made it clear that every child, every African child, needs a mother and father, that they need an equal level of masculine and feminine energy in their life. And many of the adult black men, these were accomplished black men, but disagreed with me because they said that their mother raised them by herself and that she did a good job. And what I try to get them to understand, although your mother raised you by yourself and she did a good job, that is not as good of a job that can be done if your fathers were also participating in your life. Your mother is not at fault for raising you alone, but we have to understand that God gave us two parents because we need two parents. And saying that it's okay for mothers to be raising boys by themselves is feeding this epidemic we have of single parenthood. We also have a rising number of black women who, having raised children by themselves, believe that they don't need the father around. We have a serious epidemic of black women who are intentionally keeping the black men out of the lives of their children, and many of them are being supported by their mothers, which is the children's grandmothers, and other women in the community, even in the conscious community, who are working against the father's presence in the lives of their children. So this is a very, very, very big issue. Now, psychologically, what are some of the ramifications of single-parented children? Well, number one, homosexuality and lesbianism is at the top of the list. When a black boy doesn't get enough masculine energy from his father, he can grow to hate his father for not being there, or he could grow to continue to search out the masculine presence that he was denied in his childhood, which can lead to a romantic relationship with another man who's looking to exploit that boy for sexual favor. Same thing happens with a girl. If the father's not there, she may grow to hate black manhood, and as a result of that, decide that she wants to spend the rest of her life with a woman. We also know that children who come from single-parent homes suffer more anxiety, more depression, more chemical dependence, more juvenile delinquency. They drop out of school quicker. They're less likely to get married, and they're less likely to have the other parent of their own children involved in a child's life. So we have to look at the intergenerational consequences of this single parenthood. And we have to say, I have to say personally, that I'm guilty of that. I have two children, two daughters who I love with all my heart, but I had those daughters out of wedlock. And that is not the type of example that I want to set for African-American boys. And whenever I do talk to our young men in schools, in prison, community centers, libraries, and when I travel the country lecturing, I try to make them understand that I made a mistake not in having my children, but the manner in which those children was brought into this world, and that was outside of wedlock. So we have to be very, very cautious. The example that, we set for young people, because I myself am even being guilty, I'm not setting a perfect example as well. But again, us have children who are being raised in homes with both parents. Parents can't be together. If the parents can't be together in the same home, because sometimes that's possible. Sometimes we find out that the people we have children with aren't people we really want to be with for the rest of our lives. That can happen. Then it's important that we be involved in the children's life for the duration of their lives. What matters most is not a mother and father living together with the children. That's not what matters most. What matters most is the mother and father working together for the best interest of our children. So when I talk about single-parent homes, I'm not simply saying that the father is not in the house. When I speak of single parenthood, I'm speaking of the father's presence in the life of the child. And I want to clarify that, because most of the time when discussions of single parenthood are had, it's about whether or not the father is physically in the home. I'm not as interested in that. That's also important, and we love to see our children in the homes with both parents. But when I speak of single parenthood, I speak about the father's presence in the home, in the life of the child, because even if he is present in the life of a child, many of the side effects that can come from not being in the house can be curtailed and avoided.
Now, in our black communities, we have racism amongst one another. What are some of the things we need to do in order for us to, as people, to come together in unity?
Well, one of the things that Marcus Garvey said, he said that the racism practiced within the race exceeds the amount of racism that is directed at the race. And I like to substitute the word self-hatred for racism, only because racism is a system that requires sufficient organization, which we don't have. So we really have self-hatred. being directed at each other. The one thing to understand about the self-hatred that is being directed at Africans by Africans is that it's going to be difficult to undo that type of conditioning without properly socializing our children. See, we could exterminate any ill that affects us as a people within 20 years. Within one generation, you could get rid of teenage pregnancy. One generation, you could get rid of interracial marriage. In one generation, you could get rid of the petty gossiping and character assassination and self-hatred that takes place so much in our community. The problem is that we are not actively rearing the children differently than the way in which we were reared. In other words, the babies that are now in kindergarten, first and second grade, are we socializing them to think and behave any differently than we do? Most of the time we're not. We're raising them exactly as we were raised. These young people listen to the same types of filthy gangster rap that we listen to. They're subject to the same white Jesus that we were subjected to. They're taught the values of the American social order, including light-skin supremacy, like we have been taught. So the problem is that we're not producing an African with a greater degree of consciousness than what we have. So we keep getting the same thing over and over again. It's like if you bake a cake. You know, if you bake the cake a certain way, it'll come out soft. If you bake the cake a certain way, it'll come out hard. If you bake this cake a certain way, it'll come out fluffy. If you bake the cake a certain way, it'll come out flat. Now, it's the same ingredients that you're using to bake the cake. The flour, the eggs, the milk, the water, the protein. It's the same cake, but how you bake it will give you a totally different product. It's the same with raising our children. We're all putting them in the oven of the same cultural incubator. The problem is we are literally educating and socializing them the exact same way that we were. So the girl who's in 8th grade is looking forward to getting pregnant in the 10th grade. The boy who's in the 10th grade is looking forward to going to jail when he's 19 years old. Why? Because we are not teaching our children how to think any differently than we have been taught. And until we do, you're going to keep on seeing the problems that we have get worse, because problems don't stay the same. This is a psychological reality. Problems don't stay the same. They are always getting better or they are always getting worse. They never stay the same. White supremacy is either getting weaker or it's getting stronger. Black people's control over their children is getting weaker or it's getting stronger. Nothing stays the same. So if you're not working to improve the manner in which we raise the next generation, then we're automatically hurting it. And that's why the black-on-black violence gets worse. It's worse now than it was in the 90s. It was worse in the 90s than it was in the 70s. It was worse in the 70s than it was in the 60s. Look at the dropout rate. The dropout rate is worse now than it was 10 years ago, which was worse than what it was 20 years ago, because problems do not stay the same. They get worse. And because we have stopped working collectively and seriously to address our problems, they've only gotten so much more worse. Unfortunately, too many distractions have been placed in our way. Obama is a distraction. Religion is a distraction. Sometimes our cultural history can be a distraction for people who seek to turn our history into another religion, a form of escapism. We have drugs is a distraction. Materialism is a distraction. The so-called black middle class, which doesn't even exist, that's a distraction. So the problem is that propaganda, as Marcus Garvey said, is the greatest weapon used to destroy your people. Mr. Garvey said propaganda is even worse than open warfare. And if you look at the war against black people, it's predominantly a war of propaganda. You're simply being led to believe your conditions are better. Your conditions aren't better, but you're being told this. When black people came out of physical slavery in December of 1865, with the passage of the 13th Amendment, we owned less than 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. Here we are, 144 years later, with all the athletes and entertainers and Oprah Winfrey's and Bill Cosby's, and we still only own 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in our country. So if we're saying that we made progress, whose definition of progress that we're using? And we have to be very careful in particular about the definitions we use to describe our reality, because you are a slave to the definition that you accept. So if you accept progress being the fact that you got a half-black president in the White House, or if you accept progress as the fact that half of the NBA superstars and half of the NFL superstars are black men, if you see that as progress, that more black people own homes, or should I say are paying on homes, because most of them won't own them. Their grandchildren will still be paying them off with these 30-year mortgages. But if your definition of progress is purely material acquisition, then we've made a lot of progress. But if your definition of progress is politically sound, as is mine, meaning progress is the extent to which you control the means of production necessary for your community to sustain itself, we haven't moved forward. We actually moved backward. We own less land, less business, and less real estate in America today than we did 40 years ago. So who in the hell's definition of progress are we using?
Powerful stuff. Once again, we have Dr. Umar Johnson, for those who just joined in, as our special guest. The title of the show is Addressing the Black Struggle. Have any questions, just dial the number 646-716-7320. This is 646-716-7320. Now, there is a lot of interracial dating going on today. Tell the listening audience, what is your take on it and how it affects us as a people?
Well, first we need to understand all low self-esteem people cling to other people who have more self-respect. Black people are psychologically addicted to white people. This is an absolute reality. The only people in this world who are interested in integration are people without power. Groups of people with power don't integrate because integration is the dissipation of one's collective power. So Chinese people are not interested in integrating because to integrate means you have to integrate your political and economic strength. Jews, East Indians, Arabs, Hispanics, they're not interested in integrating because they're trying to amass power. When you're trying to build power for your community, integration is unnecessary. Integration is only for groups of people who don't have enough self-respect to build within the community. And so instead they look for acceptance outside of the community. That's why black people don't get any respect. We're not interested in doing it for ourselves. We only want to be accepted by other people, never accepted by ourselves. You look at the average black integrationist, and he's not trying to integrate with his people. He's a separatist when it comes to his people. He's only trying to integrate with people who don't look like him. You put him in a black community, and he runs away as quickly as he can. So is he an integrationist? He's an integrationist when it involves other people. But when it involves people who look like him, he's totally separatist. Interracial marriage, which is predominantly a black male, white female thing, is nothing more than the same concept being expressed on a romantic level. If I hate what I am, if I hate who I am, if I hate what I look like, naturally I'm going to try to destroy my cultural phenotype so that when my children come into the world, they don't look like me. Interracial marriage, babies with white women, is another strategy that black men use to try to commit genetic extermination. It is a form of eugenics because you're putting your seed into the womb of a white woman, incubating the baby that is biologically African, but phenotypically they're going to look more European than they look African in many cases. Now, of course, you have to roll the dice with that because sometimes they can come out still looking as African as you because we are the carriers of the dominant gene. But in most cases, they're lucky enough, unfortunately, to have their child look lighter than them and look whiter than them. So black men marry white women because they don't have any love or respect for the women of their own race. They don't see anything good in a black woman. Don't get me wrong. Some of our sisters do have issues. There's a lot of black men out here fighting like hell to participate in the lives of their children because black women are keeping them out of it and for very selfish reasons. Yes, our sisters got problems. They're not perfect, but we also have problems as black men, and we're not perfect. So if our sisters can stick to us, then the last thing we can do is stick to them. And I think that we all, as black men, need to take a vow of commitment to black women. Whenever we do get married, for those of us who are not, we have to marry within the race. Now, as a Pan-Africanist, You can get that woman from anywhere you choose on the globe. She may come from the Caribbean. She may come from the Holy Continent. She may come from Europe. She may come from Canada. She may come from Central South America. She might come from Australia. I don't care where you get her, but she must be an African. If you don't like the personality type of black women in America, so be it. Get a sister from another place, but she must be an African. Black men are marrying white women because they want to be white themselves, and they feel that at least if they can have the white man's woman, then it makes them feel like they're a little bit more equal to the white man. You would not be interested in marrying a white woman if you didn't have low racial self-esteem yourself.
Yeah, once again, the number is 646-716-7320. If you have any questions or comments, you can press the number 1, and we'll bring you into the conversation. Do you believe that religion has brought us even closer together as a people or farther apart? You know, a lot of our brothers, they, run to the church for spiritual upliftment, stuff like that. What's your take on religion?
The black church is a drug. It has not brought us closer together. It has served to only push us further apart. When I speak of the black church, I'm speaking of all black religions, Islam, Christianity, even African traditional religions. You look at all of the religions, they have basically operated on a principle of tribalism. That is to say that what I do is better than what you do, okay? And if you don't believe in my God, then you're automatically wrong. Telling someone that their God is wrong, okay, isn't something you want to do if you're trying to forge life-lasting bonds. Black religion is a drug. It is put there on purpose to give hopeless black people an opportunity to put faith in something other than their own ability to change their circumstances. A drug is anything you invest time, money, and effort in that gives you the appearance that things are getting better, when in reality they're not. You drink a bottle of alcohol. A couple of hours after you come down after you're high, you're in the same situation you were in. But while you were high, you couldn't tell. It made it look like it was better. Same thing with church. You go into church 8 o'clock in the morning. While you're there for 3 or 4 hours, once they're done taking your money, you feel like things have gotten better. But when you go back home, you're still dealing with the same community, the same black-on-black crime, the same police brutality, the same mass unemployment, and the church is doing nothing about it. Honestly, we would be better off as a people if we had no religion. What we need is spirituality. We need Africans to create their own individual relationship with the universe as opposed to listening to someone tell you how to do it when they themselves aren't even serving the Creator. They're serving the damn devil. There is no religion on earth that can prove to have been a benefit to black people at no time, at no place. Every religion in the world today has been used as a weapon against us and continues to be used as such.
Once again, we have Dr. Umar Johnson here as our special guest. The number is 646-716-7320. We're winding down to the last 18 minutes of the show, so if you guys that's right now on the switchboard, a lot of people calling in right now. If you have any questions, now is the time to press 1, and we'll add you into the conversation. Do you think a lot of our forerunners in the black conscious community don't have respect for the elders? You know, there's a lot of, young people coming up and they're starting to waking up and starting to get a lot of this knowledge. But there's a lot of disrespect, they're saying, to a lot of the elders, such as yourself. What's your take on that issue?
Well, the elder-youth issue, I believe that we should have respect for our elders. But then the question also becomes, what is the definition that we're using for eldership? I believe that all African people, based on whatever age they are, should receive respect just by getting older. I am one to give respect to anyone who's old enough to be my parent, even if they didn't lead an exemplary life. But most of the time when we're talking about eldership in a cultural context, we're talking about someone who has led an exemplary life and has actually sacrificed and invested time and energy into the upliftment of the African community. As far as youth disrespecting eldership, a lot of that is up to one's perception. And I say that because any time a youth questions an elder from some older people, that's considered disrespect. And I think, on the other hand, we don't look enough to see how elders can actually disrespect youth. We got to be honest here. We have to stop romanticizing cultural concepts like eldership. Let's be honest. Many of our elders in the black community have sold out the young generations. Many of them have worked with white supremacy to destroy the black community. So, again, when people start throwing around the term eldership, I want to know who they're talking about. W.E.B. Du Bois was Marcus Garvey's elder, but he helped to destroy him. So does that mean Marcus Garvey was supposed to respect him? When you study our history, you will find that a lot of elders actually worked against the youth leadership. Look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Many of the pastors who opposed his staunch stand on civil rights were technically his elders, but he had to speak out against them. And if you listen to a lot of his sermons, he regularly rebuked men who were old enough to be his father. So when we talk about disrespect for elders, more clarity is needed from people who are asking those questions, because just because you're old doesn't make you an elder, not in Dr. Umar Johnson's book.
Now, I see we have some questions here from the listening audience. I'm going to add somebody in right now. 989, you're live on Debate Talk for You. You have a question or a comment? 989.
Yeah, actually, I'd just like to say, I appreciate what you brothers are doing, and I just want to thank you, for having a wonderful show.
I appreciate it, my brother. Appreciate it. Definitely, I appreciate that. You have another question, 717. You're live on Debate Talk for You. You have a question or a comment, 717?
I do, actually. Interracial dating. Don't you believe that as a Christian, now I'm not saying that as Christians we are supposed to abandon our culture, our belief system, the things that we do in our own culture, but aren't we supposed to love all people? I don't necessarily believe that this is a self-esteem issue if a black person is to be with a white person or vice versa, and this person is to be with a black person. Aren't we supposed to embrace each other as well as our culture, rather than putting labels such as self-esteem issues and not wanting to be who we are or be a part of our own race?
Whenever there's any type of an issue taking place in the black community, the question you have to ask yourself is who benefits from this? When black men marry white women, who benefits? Economically, the women benefit and the black community loses. How so? Because women tend to live longer than men. So I'm a black man. If I marry a white woman and I'm going to leave this earth before she does, under most normal circumstances, the wealth that I built up automatically falls under her jurisdiction. And she's free to do with that wealth as she so pleases. Now, she is a European. No matter how much you want to ignore people's race, race is the most significant identifier and issue in the world. And you can't explain it away just by wishing that it's not there. But with that, when I die, that woman is not likely to take my wealth and give it to my people, black people, who need that money. Instead, that money goes to her, stays with her, goes to her family. So what I just did by marrying a white woman is I committed an act of racial sabotage and treachery, because I took millions of dollars out of the mouth of my people and gave it to a people who don't even need the money. So economically, interracial dating benefits white people. Now let's look at the children. Psychologically, and I've done a lot of work with biracial children. I've had biracial friends. I've dated biracial women. And allow me to clarify, any person with an African parent is an African.
You would be suggesting that all white women are racist at the end of the day, and that all these white women would benefit themselves ultimately and not benefit the culture of their biracial children?
Let me tell you what I'm suggesting.
That's what you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that all white people are racist. I am stating that European culture itself thrives upon racism. So there's no such thing as any European culture not having racism as a cultural aspect, because the rise of European people was only possible through racism and is only maintained through racism. 10% of the world's population can only control the other 90 through an effective program of global white supremacy. So there is no European culture without white supremacy. There's no Italian culture without it. There's no Irish culture without it. There's no Jewish culture without it. There's no Anglo-Saxon culture without it. There's no Portuguese culture without it. There's no Belgian culture without it. There's no Greco-Roman culture without it. White culture is profoundly a racist culture. It is based on racial supremacy. That has never changed. And if it did, I need you to give me a date when white culture stopped being racist. When did it cease to be racist?
I believe there's a date when a lot of people stopped being racist. I mean, maybe the majority.
When did that? Do you have a date? When did white people come together?
Of Europeans, maybe the majority of Europeans are, racist, white supremacy. I definitely believe in your stats. I definitely believe in all of your facts and figures. But I also believe that there is a, even in its smallest measurement, a percentage of people that are not racist.
I think there may be a percentage of people who attempt to control their racism. But we have to be honest, at the end of the day, no matter how liberal you might claim to be, when it comes to siding with one's race, white people do not have a history, nor do anyone else except black people because of slavery. They do not have a history of siding with the opposition over their own people. Study any liberal movement in American history or global history. Whether you look at the civil rights movement, you can look at the abolitionist movement, you can look at the current NAACP and Urban League. At the end of the day, when the fire hits the metal, white liberals are not more loyal to black people than they are to white people. And no white person could ever claim to be more interested in a black person than the black person is interested in themselves. Even white people have written on the hypocrisy of white liberals who claim not to see race, but when you look at their political views, when you look at where they live, when you look at their thoughts and ideas on various political issues, they're no different than the Ku Klux Klan or anyone else. So one thing that I try to do for my people is make sure that they are absolutely clear that whether a white person identifies themselves as a liberal or not, they might be respectful towards you. But at the end of the day, they are loyal to their own race. And to be loyal to the European race is to be loyal to white supremacy because the European race is based upon white supremacy.
Once again, the number is 646-716-7320. That's 646-716-7320. Our special guest is Dr. Umar Johnson. We're winding down to the last 9 minutes of the show. So if you have any questions, press the number 1, and we'll add you into the conversation. Now, what are some of the books you recommend to the black youth who only understand black history from the classroom?
Well, first, let me finish. I want to make a quick point that I was going to make before I was interrupted by the young lady, and that is when a black man has a child with a white woman, that child is quote-unquote biracial, although biologically they're African, and that's how I see them unless they don't identify with the race. Historically, white men have always used their biracial children to work against the best interests of African people. That's one of the reasons why we have so much light-skinned supremacy in the black community now. That's why there's so much distrust between darker-skinned Africans and lighter-skinned Africans, because historically it was the light-skinned African, okay, and prior to the light-skinned African, it was the biracial African, the product of the slave master and the slave woman, and they would use that biracial child to control the larger black masses, but at the same time keep their loyalty because they were being loyal to their father, who is the white man. And most children have a difficult time being loyal to their race, black people, or when their father is white. And so we have to realize that there was an intentional creation of a hybrid race in Africa, a hybrid race in Asia, a hybrid race in Europe, a hybrid race in the Caribbean, and a hybrid race within the Americas. Biracial Africans, that was a political strategy. White men deliberately seek to create a race in between so we can use them against their darker brothers. So again, when we talk about interracial marriage or any issue, who benefits from it? Who benefits financially? White women. Who benefits politically? White men, because their children, their biracial children, are still going to be loyal to the white race. So again, interracial marriage is not a harmless behavior. It has nothing to do with love. Most interracial marriages are black men with power, privilege, prestige, and education, and they tend to marry white women who don't have the same degree of education. So clearly this has nothing to do with love, because there's always a one-way street of the black man giving something to her, and all she's giving him is probationary status in the white race. They're going to use biracial children. Here we go again. Who benefits from interracial children being born? Okay, they're going to use the prevalence of interracial children who identify as biracial and multiracial as opposed to African, and they're going to use them to explain away African identity. They're going to have people who say, I'm not black because my grandmother was Irish. I'm not black because my grandfather was Italian. I'm not black, my mother is Portuguese. Then they're going to find other people, okay, who got white ancestors who they dug up through their slave routes, and they're going to say, well, I'm not actually African because my grandfather was here in America before the 13 colonies. So what they're going to use is they're going to use black people with white blood to argue that there are no Africans in America, since most of us belong to other races. Why are they doing this? Because that is a perfect way to set the stage for mass extermination of African people, mass extermination of black men, the mass poor health care against black women, the miseducation. Why? Because if black people are willing to say there's no such thing as a black man or a black woman, how can you possibly say there's mass incarceration of black men where there are no black men? How can you say there is miseducation against black children when there are no black children? If we are not careful and let these Negroes try to argue that we are not African, that we belong to some hybrid race, that will set the stage for them to get rid of African or African American or black as a statistical category. And once you get rid of blackness as a statistical category, you no longer have to keep statistics on how many black men are in jail. You no longer have to keep statistics on how many black men are killed by police. You no longer have to keep statistics on how many black children go into special education. So we better watch this whole thing about who's black in America, because they're trying to strip us of our Africanity, because so many of us want to be white as opposed to being black.
Don't touch that dial. You're now listening to Debate Talk Free Radio.